It was late at night and the streets outside the city were almost empty. The moonlight was soft and the road stretched ahead like a dark ribbon. Most people were home sleeping, but one man was still out driving. His car moved smoothly along the quiet highway, the tires humming against the asphalt. There was no rush and no noise, only the sound of the engine keeping him company. The man sat behind the wheel calm and relaxed. He was the kind of person who liked peace more than drama, and this silent drive gave him just that. He kept the window slightly open and the cool breeze touched his face. The scent of trees and faraway rain drifted into the car. His eyes scanned the road carefully, not because he was worried, but because he had always been careful. He respected the road and he respected rules. Every turn of the wheel showed patience. Every press of the pedal showed control. Behind him, the world was quiet, but suddenly the silence was broken. A bright flash of red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought maybe an ambulance was passing by. He even slowed down a little to move to the side. But then he realized the lights stayed right behind him. They were not passing, they were chasing. His heart gave a small jump, not out of guilt but out of surprise. He checked his speed, it was steady and within the limit. He checked his seatbelt, it was fastened. He searched his mind quickly, did he miss a sign? Did he break any law? The answer was no, everything was normal. Yet the flashing lights grew brighter and closer. He carefully steered the car to the side of the road and stopped. The night suddenly felt heavier. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed louder than the engine. He placed both hands on the steering wheel and took a slow breath. He had dealt with many kinds of people in life, but something about this situation felt strange. The road was too empty, the timing too odd. The car behind him stopped as well. Two shadows moved inside. Then the doors opened. The man watched in his mirror as two figures stepped out. Their uniforms looked official, but their movements carried something sharp, something unfriendly. The crunch of gravel under their boots echoed in the quiet night. One officer approached the driver's side slowly, tapping the flashlight against his hand. The beam of light danced across the car window before landing on the man's face. The officer's eyes narrowed as if searching for something. The second officer circled the back of the car, writing something on a small notepad. "License and registration," the first officer said in a firm voice. The man nodded calmly and handed them over. His fingers did not shake. His voice did not tremble. He asked politely, "May I know the reason I was stopped?" The officer's lips curved into a half-smile, but it was not a kind one. "Speeding," he said quickly. "And I smell alcohol on you." His words cut through the night like a knife. The man blinked in surprise. He had not touched a single drop of alcohol, and his speed had been exactly right. Still, he said nothing. He just listened. The second officer leaned closer, his eyes cold. "We could take you in right now," he said, "or you can make things easy." His words hung in the air heavy and sharp. The night no longer felt peaceful. The empty road was no longer a safe place. The man realized something was very wrong, but even as the tension built, he did not raise his voice. He did not argue. His calmness was his shield. He had faced harder things in life than two men trying to play games. Deep inside, he knew the truth would reveal itself. He just had to stay steady. The officers stood waiting, expecting fear, expecting panic, but the man remained silent. His steady eyes looked back at them with quiet strength. The night stretched on. The lights kept flashing. But the man's calm presence slowly changed the air around them. They thought they had found a victim, but they had no idea who they had actually stopped on that lonely road. The air around the car grew heavy as the two officers stood by. The first one leaned closer to the window, his flashlight shining directly into the man's eyes. The man did not flinch, he only blinked and waited. The officer's expression was hard, almost rehearsed, like someone used to intimidating strangers at night. "You were driving too fast," the officer repeated, his voice sharp and impatient. The man stayed quiet. He knew he had not been speeding. His speedometer was steady, and he had always respected traffic rules. Yet the officer spoke as if the crime was already proven. The second officer, still circling the car, tapped the trunk with his hand. His footsteps were slow and heavy. He glanced inside through the back window and then walked back to the driver's side. He pulled out a small notepad and scribbled something down, pretending to write a ticket. "Step out of the car," the first officer said suddenly. The man hesitated for a second, then calmly unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The cool night breeze touched his face again as he stood outside. He kept his hands visible, showing no sign of aggression. The flashlight beam followed him as he stood still. The officer sniffed the air exaggeratedly and said, "You've been drinking? Haven't you?" The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. He had not touched alcohol in years, but he knew arguing would only give them fuel. "I haven't been drinking," he answered politely. His tone was clear, without fear. The officers looked at each other, one smirking while the other nodded slowly. They were not looking for truth. They were looking for something else. The second officer leaned closer and whispered, but the man could hear every word. "We can take you down to the station. Long night for you, lots of paperwork, maybe worse." His eyes narrowed. "But if you cooperate, we can forget this ever happened." The meaning was clear. They did not want justice, they wanted money. The man remained calm, his breathing steady. He had seen people like this before. People who wore power like a mask and used it to scare others. But he had not expected it from men in uniform. Not on this lonely road. "How much?" the first officer asked bluntly. His eyes glimmered with greed. He didn't even bother to hide it. He tapped the man's chest lightly with the flashlight, as if to remind him of who was in charge. "You give us something for coffee and we all go home happy." The words were almost casual, but the weight behind them was dark. The man kept silent, letting the officer's words hang in the night. The second officer added, "Otherwise we arrest you right now. Charge you for reckless driving and drunk behavior. You'll spend the night in a cell." The man studied their faces. He noticed the arrogance in their eyes, the way they leaned in too close, the way they assumed he would break under pressure. They had done this before, he could see it. This was not the first time they had stopped someone on a quiet road just to fill their pockets. But what they did not know was that this man was different. He was not ordinary, his calm presence was not weakness. It was strength. He stood quietly, his mind working. Every second of silence unsettled the officers more. They expected begging, they expected fear. But instead they saw patience. The first officer grew impatient. He waved his flashlight and said, "Come on, don't make this hard. Just slip us a little something and drive away." His partner nodded, crossing his arms as if already confident of the outcome. The man finally spoke. His voice was low but steady. "I do not pay for lies." The officers exchanged quick glances, their smirks fading for a moment. They were not used to this kind of answer. Still, they pushed harder. "We can make things very bad for you," the second one said, his voice carrying a warning. The night around them seemed darker now. The red and blue lights continued to flash, reflecting off the car's windows and the empty road. No other vehicle passed by, no witness appeared. It was just the three of them, locked in a silent battle of patience and power. The officers stepped closer, their shadows long under the flashing lights. The first one lowered his voice, almost hissing. "Last chance, pay now, or regret later." The man's calm eyes met his, steady and unshaken. At that moment, the balance of the night shifted. The officers believed they were in control, but they were standing on the edge of a discovery that would soon shatter their arrogance. They thought they were pressing a helpless stranger, but in truth, they were standing before someone whose name alone carried more power than both their badges combined. The two officers stood close, their flashlights cutting through the night air. Their voices carried threats, their words heavy with arrogance. They believed they had cornered an ordinary man, someone who would fold under pressure and hand them money. But the man did not bend. He remained steady like a mountain, calm in a storm. He looked at them without anger. His eyes were steady, his breathing was even. There was no panic in his voice when he finally spoke. "I respect the law," he said softly, "but I will not pay for something I did not do." The officers exchanged looks. Surprised by his calm tone, most people they stopped would have already started begging or arguing. But this man gave them neither. The first officer tried to shake him. He stepped even closer, pointing his flashlight right into the man's face. The harsh beam of light tried to blind him, but the man simply blinked. He did not flinch. His stillness made the officer uneasy. It was as if the power of intimidation slipped away. "You think you're clever," the second officer sneered, "but you don't know how things work out here. People like us decide what happens. We decide if you drive home tonight or if you spend the night in jail." His voice was loud, almost echoing on the empty road. He expected the man to finally show fear, but instead, the man simply placed his hands behind his back and stood tall. He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He simply let silence stretch between them. That silence was heavier than any words could be. It made the officers restless. Their confidence began to crack like thin glass. The man's calmness came from years of practice. He had lived through struggles far greater than this moment. He knew the power of patience. He knew that when someone tries to provoke you, the strongest weapon is not anger but control. He breathed slowly, each inhale steady, each exhale quiet. The officers grew more frustrated. They wanted him to panic. They wanted him to rush into a mistake, but he stayed silent, as if their threats were nothing more than wind. Finally, the first officer slammed his hand against the hood of the car, the sound echoing loudly in the night. "You're testing us," he growled. "Do you know who we are?" The man tilted his head slightly, his calm eyes never leaving the officer's face. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. His voice carried no anger, no arrogance, just a calm firmness that made the officers pause for a second. They laughed nervously, trying to cover their unease. "You're just another fool on the road," the second officer snapped. "You're nothing without us letting you drive away." But deep down, something about the man's presence was making them uneasy. He wasn't begging, he wasn't scared. He was too composed, too steady. The man reached into his pocket slowly, his movements deliberate so they could see he was not reaching for anything dangerous. He pulled out his wallet and held it calmly in his hand. The officers smirked, thinking at last he had given up. But instead of handing them cash, he flipped it open to show his license, his face, his name, his identity clear under the light. The first officer's smirk faltered. He looked at the photo, then at the man's face. His mouth opened slightly. The second officer leaned closer, shining his light on the ID. At that moment, both froze. Their confidence melted away, their eyes widened. The man standing before them was not just any driver. He was Keanu Reeves, the star whose face was known across the world, the actor admired for his kindness, his humility, and his quiet strength. They had been trying to shake down one of the most respected men alive. Keanu stayed calm even as recognition hit them. He did not gloat, he did not raise his voice. He simply said, "You carry a badge. It should mean honor, not greed." His words were soft, but they struck harder than any threat could. The silence after his words was sharp. The corrupt officers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado gone. The flashing red and blue lights that had once made them look powerful now seemed like a warning. They had stepped into something far bigger than they expected. The man remained calm because he understood something they did not. Anger might have made the situation worse, but patience, composure, and quiet strength disarmed them completely. His calmness was his armor, and it worked better than any shield. The two officers looked at each other, panic starting to grow in their eyes. They had tried to break a man, but instead they had revealed their own weakness. Keanu Reeves, the man they thought was an easy target, had stayed calm and turned the night into a mirror of their corruption. And in that moment they realized their biggest mistake. They had chosen the wrong man to threaten on this lonely road. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as the officer stared at the man's license. His eyes went from the plastic card to the face standing before him. Back and forth, his smirk was gone, his throat felt dry. He blinked twice as if trying to make sure he was seeing correctly. The second officer leaned over, peering into the wallet, and his mouth slowly fell open. They had expected just another frightened driver, maybe some office worker or a tired traveler. They had expected excuses they could crush with threats. They had expected to leave richer with a handful of cash, but instead, they were standing in front of someone whose name carried power far beyond their little tricks. The letters on the license confirmed it. The face under the beam confirmed it. It was Keanu Reeves. For a long moment, silence ruled the night. The flashing red and blue lights from their car painted the scene in broken colors. But none of the officers spoke. The man before them, calm and steady, had not raised his voice once. Yet he had already turned the game upside down. They thought they had trapped him, but they were the ones trapped. The first officer swallowed hard. His hand that held the flashlight shook slightly. He tried to cover it by lowering the beam to the ground. His partner shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his uniform collar. He whispered nervously, "It can't be him." Right, but deep inside they both knew it was. Keanu Reeves stood quietly. His calmness never wavered. He did not smile. He did not show anger. He simply looked at them with steady eyes that seemed to carry the weight of something larger. His voice finally broke the silence, soft but strong. "You stopped me for money," he said. "But what you carry is supposed to be trust." The words sank into the air. Heavy and unshakable, the officers who had been so confident minutes ago now found themselves staring at the ground. They knew who he was, everyone knew. Keanu was not just a movie star. He was known around the world as a man of humility, a man who treated strangers with kindness. His reputation was as strong as his roles on screen. The first officer tried to recover, forcing a nervous laugh. "We were just doing our job," he muttered, but his voice cracked. The second one quickly added, "Yeah, routine stop. No big deal." They both looked like boys caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Their earlier arrogance had vanished. Replaced by fear and embarrassment, Keanu said nothing. His silence pressed harder on them than any shouted threat. He had nothing to prove, his identity alone was enough. The officers knew if this story ever reached the public, their careers would be over. Worse, their names would be remembered not as protectors, but as criminals in uniform. The second officer stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. The road that had seemed empty now felt too exposed. Too dangerous, every second stretched longer. Keanu's steady presence was making them unravel. He didn't need to call anyone, he didn't need to move. His very existence in that moment was judgment enough. "Look," the first officer stammered. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot, it's late, you know. Mistakes happen." His words stumbled out in a rush, trying to undo what could not be undone. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his calm eyes never leaving the man's face. "Mistakes," he repeated softly, "or choices." The officers had no answer. They shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Their badges gleamed faintly under the flashing lights, symbols of duty. Yet they had just proven themselves unworthy of them, and now they were standing face to face with a man who had more honor in silence than they had in their threats. Keanu reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out his phone. The officers stiffened, panic flashing across their faces. They imagined headlines, investigations, their faces on the news. They imagined everything crumbling because they had tried to squeeze money from the wrong man. "Wait," one of them said quickly. "There's no need for that. We can let you go right now, no charges." "Nothing." His voice cracked with desperation. Keanu looked at them calmly. His thumb hovered over the phone screen. His words were quiet but sharp. "You think letting me go erases what you just did?" The officers froze. Unable to answer, they were used to holding power, but here they stood stripped of it, their authority undone by their own greed and by the identity of the man they had tried to exploit. The night that had begun with flashing lights and false accusations had now turned into a mirror. The hidden identity of the man they thought was weak had been revealed, and it exposed them completely. The officers felt smaller with every second. Their power had evaporated, and all that remained was fear. Keanu did not shout. He did not curse, he did not need to. His quiet words and steady eyes had already done more damage than anything else, and deep down the officers knew the truth. They had made the biggest mistake of their lives by stopping him on that lonely road. The two officers stood frozen on the side of the empty road. Their faces had lost all color. The flashlights in their hands no longer felt like tools of power. They felt heavy, almost useless. The flashing red and blue lights from their car still painted the night in broken colors. But the mood had shifted completely. The arrogance they carried minutes ago had melted into pure fear. They stared at the man in front of them. His calm eyes seemed to see right through them. His silence made their hearts beat faster. They had shouted, they had threatened, they had tried to push him into fear, but now they were the ones trembling inside. Their mouths were dry, their hands shook slightly. They had realized who he was, Keanu Reeves. His name echoed in their minds. This was not just a rich man or a celebrity. This was someone respected worldwide, admired not only for his movies but for his humility. Every story people told about him painted him as kind, patient, generous. Now here he stood in the middle of a dark road, looking at them with quiet disappointment. The first officer swallowed hard. His earlier smirk was gone. His voice, which had been loud and sharp, now came out shaky. We didn't mean anything by it," he muttered. He glanced at his partner, hoping for backup. But the second officer looked just as shaken. His lips pressed tightly. His eyes darted to the ground, unable to meet Keanu's gaze. The weight of their mistake pressed down on them. They had not only tried to extort a man, they had tried to extort the wrong man. If this reached the media, their careers would be destroyed. If their department found out, they would lose their badges. They had risked everything for greed, and now their fear was eating them alive. Keanu did not need to raise his voice. His calm presence alone was enough. He stood tall, his phone in his hand, his expression steady. He had no anger, no hatred, only quiet disappointment. And that disappointment was worse than rage. It cut deeper. The officers felt smaller with every second. The second officer finally tried to speak. His words stumbled out. "Sir, it's late. You know how things can look. Maybe we got it wrong." His excuses sounded weak even to his own ears. His heart pounded, sweat rolled down his temple. He knew the truth, they both knew the truth, but their fear made them reach for any lie that could save them. Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice was calm but sharp. "You accuse me of crimes I did not commit," he said. "You demanded money instead of truth." The officers shifted nervously, their boots crunching against the gravel. Neither dared to answer. His words had pinned them to their own guilt. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the distant wind. The road, empty and quiet, felt like a stage. And on that stage their weakness was exposed for the world to see. They could not hide behind uniforms. They could not hide behind their badges. In that moment, they were nothing more than men who had betrayed their duty. The first officer's mind raced. He thought of his family, his job, his reputation. He thought of the shame if this ever came out. He thought of people laughing at them, calling them cowards, corrupt, worthless. His chest tightened. His fear grew heavier than the night itself. The second officer felt the same. He imagined headlines. He imagined their faces on television screens. He imagined being remembered not as a protector of people, but as a thief with a badge. His fear made him weak. His knees almost shook as he tried to stand still. Keanu watched them carefully. His calmness never breaking, he knew fear when he saw it. He knew they had already destroyed themselves with their actions. He did not need to shout, he did not need to threaten. Their own fear was punishing them harder than anything else. The first officer tried again, his voice desperate. "Please, we can forget this. You can just drive away, no one has to know." But even as he spoke, he knew the words were empty. Keanu's steady gaze told him nothing would ever be forgotten. Not by them, not by him. Fear pressed heavier on their shoulders. Their badges felt like chains, their guns at their sides felt useless. The power they once believed in had turned against them. The night had shown them the truth. They were not untouchable, they were not in control. They were small men who had crossed the wrong line. And standing in front of them was Keanu Reeves, calm and steady, holding a mirror to their corruption, his silence louder than any siren, his disappointment sharper than any punishment. The officers knew in their hearts that their lives would never be the same after this night. The shock of realizing his identity had broken their arrogance. The fear of what could come next had crushed their confidence. They had tried to scare a man, but now they were the ones drowning in fear. The two officers stood like statues, their fear visible in every twitch of their hands. Their mouths opened, but no clear words came out. They had run out of excuses, their arrogance was gone. The flashing lights that once gave them power now only made their shame brighter, and in front of them stood Keanu Reeves, calm, collected, and steady. Keanu looked at them for a long moment. He did not rush, he did not shout. His silence was heavy. His eyes were steady. His phone was still in his hand, but he had not called anyone yet. He was not interested in destroying them with one move. He wanted them to feel the weight of their own actions. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low but carried across the empty road. "You wear a badge," he said slowly. "That badge means trust. That badge means you protect people, not scare them." His words were like stones dropped into a quiet lake. Each one rippled through the officers' minds. They shifted uncomfortably, unable to look him in the eye. The first officer tried to force a nervous laugh, but it came out broken. He rubbed his neck and said weakly, "It was just a mistake, we didn't mean anything." But Keanu shook his head slightly. His calm voice cut through the night. "A mistake is when you take a wrong turn on the road," he said. "What you did was a choice." The second officer clenched his fists, his fear making him restless. He wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Keanu's presence made every excuse sound worthless. He had dealt with many kinds of people in life, but never had he felt so small as he did now. Keanu continued, "You stopped me because you thought you could take something from me. You wanted money, you thought fear would work. But fear is not strength, fear is weakness. The officers lowered their heads. Their faces burned with shame. The truth of his words cut deeper than any punishment they had ever imagined. His voice did not rise. He did not insult them. He simply spoke truth. And that truth was sharper than anger. His calmness was like a mirror reflecting their corruption back at them. They had no way to escape it. Keanu slipped his phone back into his pocket. He did not call anyone. He did not take a picture. He did not shout for justice. Instead, he said, "You are lucky tonight. I will not destroy your lives, but remember this moment. Every choice you make leaves a mark. Tonight you chose greed. Ask yourselves what mark you want to leave tomorrow." The officers looked at him in disbelief. They had expected rage. They had expected him to call his lawyers. They had expected headlines the next morning. But instead he was giving them something else. He was giving them a chance not to escape but to change. His calmness scared them more than any punishment could. Because punishment would end, but his words would stay in their minds forever. Every time they wore their badge, every time they stood on a road, they would remember the night Keanu Reeves told them that fear was weakness. The first officer stammered, "You're not going to report this." His voice was almost a whisper. Keanu looked at him and replied, "I don't need to. You already know what you did, and you will carry it with you." The officer's stomach twisted. He felt no relief in those words, only more weight. The second officer whispered, Why not?" He could not understand. Most men with power would have crushed them in an instant. But Keanu Reeves was different. He did not believe in revenge, he believed in lessons. His strength was not in anger, but in calm forgiveness mixed with truth. Keanu stepped back toward his car. He moved slowly, not in a hurry. He opened the door and looked at them one last time. His voice steady. "Do better," he said simply. The words carried more power than 1,000 threats. The officers stood frozen, watching him, their shame heavy, their fear unshakable. As Keanu sat back inside his car, the engine started with a soft hum. The officers glanced at each other. Both of them were pale, their hands trembling. They had been given a second chance, but it did not feel like freedom. It felt like a sentence they would carry forever. The car rolled forward, disappearing slowly down the quiet road. The red and blue light still flashed, but now they felt meaningless. The two officers stood alone in the dark, haunted by the calm voice of the man they had tried to break. Keanu's response was not anger. It was not revenge, it was something deeper. He had given them truth, he had given them a mirror. He had shown them what they were, and in doing so he had changed them. Maybe not into better men right away, but into men who could no longer hide from their own choices. The officers stood frozen even after Keanu's car disappeared into the night. The red and blue lights from their cruiser kept flashing, but they felt more like a warning than a shield. Neither officer spoke for a long while. Their minds were racing, their hearts heavy. They knew they had crossed a line that could not be erased. Keanu drove away quietly, his face calm, his hands steady on the wheel. He had chosen not to destroy them in that moment, but he also knew silence did not mean forgetting. By the time dawn touched the city skyline, the story had already begun to move forward. Keanu had made one simple call, not to a lawyer, not to the media, but to a trusted friend within law enforcement, a friend who believed in honesty, a friend who still respected the badge. That call set things into motion within hours. Higher authorities were informed. An internal review was opened. The report described the late-night stop, the false charges, the demand for money, and the names of the two officers involved. The system that once protected them now turned its gaze directly at them. By midday, whispers had started spreading within the department. Officers exchanged quiet looks in hallways. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered that they were not surprised. Rumors carried quickly, and soon the truth reached the very top. The chief himself called for immediate action. The two corrupt officers, still trying to convince themselves it would blow over, were summoned. They entered the station nervous, sweat clinging to their collars. The usual confidence they carried in their uniforms was gone. They tried to act casual, but their eyes gave them away. Everyone in the room could see their fear. They were questioned separately, their stories did not match. One tried to say it was just a routine stop. The other admitted they might have misjudged the situation. Their words twisted, but the investigators already had enough. Keanu's quiet testimony had sealed their fate. By evening, the suspension orders were signed. Their badges were taken, their weapons removed. The men who once stood tall behind flashing lights now stood small and broken in the same building where they had once felt powerful. The shock of facing Keanu Reeves had shaken them, but now the true weight of justice pressed down. News of the incident reached the press faster than they expected. It was impossible to keep quiet. Reporters caught wind of the investigation, and soon headlines appeared. Corrupt cops suspended after targeting Hollywood star. Keanu Reeves exposes police misconduct. Social media erupted. Fans around the world praised Keanu's calm bravery. People shared stories of his kindness, calling him not only a hero on screen but a hero in real life. For the two officers, the fear they had felt on that dark road now turned into something bigger. Their names were whispered with disgust. Their faces appeared in photos next to bold headlines. They could not hide anymore. The world had seen what they had done. Meanwhile, Keanu continued his life as if nothing had happened. He did not chase attention. He did not seek revenge. He simply carried on. But his quiet choice to report the truth had protected countless others who might have fallen victim to the same scheme. His calmness had turned into action, and that action had brought justice within weeks. The officers faced official hearings. Witnesses from their past came forward. Other drivers who had felt bullied. Other victims who had been too afraid to speak. Now they had courage. They saw that if a man as famous as Keanu Reeves could stand against corruption, then their voices mattered too. The truth built like a storm. Each new voice added more weight. The officers who once used fear now found themselves drowning in it. Their fear was no longer of losing money or control. It was fear of facing the full consequences of their choices. Justice had arrived not with violence, not with anger, but with quiet strength and truth. The same calmness Keanu had shown on that road now guided the outcome. The public saw the story as a reminder that even the most powerful uniforms could not protect corruption forever. The officers were removed from duty. Their careers ended, their badges taken forever. The system that once gave them power now marked them as unworthy. And while they tried to hide from shame, the memory of that night followed them. The night they met a man who did not bend. A man who chose truth over fear. Keanu never boasted about what happened. He never gave long speeches. He never painted himself as a hero. He simply showed the world that calmness and dignity were stronger than greed and fear. Justice had arrived not because he shouted, but because he stood steady, and for everyone who heard the story, it became a lesson: power should never be used to harm. Fear is not strength. True justice always comes, sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but always surely. The story of that night spread far beyond the lonely road where it happened. People everywhere heard how two corrupt officers tried to use their power for greed, and how their target turned out to be Keanu Reeves. The news traveled fast, not only because of his fame, but because of the way he handled the situation. He did not fight with anger. He did not scream. He did not humiliate them. Instead, he stayed calm. He spoke with truth, and that truth brought justice. The world reacted with admiration. Fans shared the story online, calling him an example of humility and courage. Many said that most people in his place would have shouted or taken revenge, but Keanu chose a different path. His calmness, his patience, and his quiet strength made the story powerful. It showed people that dignity is stronger than fear. In interviews later, when reporters asked about it, Keanu did not talk about the officers. He did not enjoy their downfall. He only said that power must be used with responsibility. He explained that a badge or a title should mean honor, not greed. His words touched millions. They reminded people that honesty is still the strongest weapon against corruption. The two officers who once believed they could scare anyone learned a lesson they would never forget. They lost their jobs. They lost their reputation, but more than that, they carried the shame of facing a man who showed them what real strength looked like. Their fear that night never left them. It followed them in every quiet moment. A reminder of their choices for the police department, the case became a turning point. It forced them to look closely at their own system, to ask questions, to make changes. The story became a warning that corruption, no matter how small, can destroy trust, and trust once broken is hard to repair. But the greatest lesson was not for the officers, and not for the department. It was for the people who heard the story. They saw that even in a dark place, even when surrounded by threats, a person can choose to remain calm. A person can stand with truth and dignity, and that choice can change everything. Keanu never saw himself as a hero. He never called himself a fighter of corruption. He was just a man driving home that night. But the way he handled the moment turned it into something greater. It became a reminder that kindness and calmness are not weakness. They are strength. In homes around the world, people talked about it. Parents told their children that power should not be abused. Teachers told students that courage does not always mean fighting. Sometimes it means staying calm. Fans told each other that Keanu Reeves was not just a movie star. He was a man of principle, and in quiet corners, where ordinary people face their own battles against unfairness, this story gave them hope. If a man like him could face corruption with calmness and win, maybe they could too. Maybe truth was not as weak as some believed. Maybe dignity could still shine even in darkness. The lesson of that night was simple but deep. Power is not in shouting. Power is not in fear. Real power is in calmness, in patience, in speaking truth when it matters. Keanu showed that a single person, standing steady, can expose lies and remind others of what is right. The lonely road where it all happened looked the same in the daylight. Just another stretch of highway. But for the two officers, for Keanu, and for the world that heard the story, that road became a symbol. A place where corruption was exposed. Where fear was defeated and where calm truth won. Keanu drove away that night without drama. He returned to his life quietly. But his choice to stay calm left a mark. A lesson that still inspires people. It proved that dignity can be louder than sirens. And that justice can arrive not only through courts and punishments, but also through the courage of one man who refuses to bend. And so the story lived on, told and retold. Each time it reminded people that no matter how dark the night, honesty will always find a way to shine.